Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Skill Builder webinar, Harnessing Emotional Intelligence for Effective Feedback, even virtually. I'm Allison Gonzalez with Essential Assets Group, and I'll be your host today. I'm honored to welcome Susan Schwartz as today's subject matter expert, whose passion is making complicated concepts simple. Susan is a facilitator, coach, consultant, author, and adjunct instructor at various universities. She equips project managers and subject matter experts with tools to hone communications, team building, and people management skills that will enable them to become world-class leaders. Her toolbox combines emotional intelligence, Lego serious play, and knowledge-sharing methods to assure effective feedback and conflict management. Again, welcome to today's webinar. Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison, and welcome to all of our participants. And today we're going to be talking about harnessing emotional intelligence for effective feedback, even virtually. And those are two passions that I've had. I've been working remotely for many years. And since we have all been sheltered in place the last few years, and why is sorry about this. There we go. As we shelter in place, more and more people are working remotely. And feedback is one of the most difficult tasks to perform or participate in when you're used to doing it in person in the same room. And so within today's brief overview session, we'll be talking about how to recognize the climate. When you're in an in-person meeting, you can tell from the energy in the air if people are feeling depressed, if they're really excited. And so how do you do that when you see them from the head up? And then as you base yourself on whatever mood the participants happen to be in, how do you engage them? How do you get them to feel that they're in a safe space and they can engage in the purpose of the meeting and really get into some collaborative conversations so that they can work towards thoughtful, solution-focused actions for the end. And then it comes down, I wanted to start out just looking at feedback because so many people do not like feedback. So whether one-on-one or there's multiple people and you're working on project feedback, I'm not necessarily talking about performance review. Well, one-on-one, you might be editing a report from somebody or in a group talking about a project plan or a report. So anyway, feedback can really energize people, share different viewpoints, and just come up with some really creative ideas. Though a lot of people are still afraid of what they're going to hear. They're afraid that they're going to be told that their ideas are stupid, that they weren't thinking in the right direction, that it's just bad. And so when you start to listen to people and think about, what their greatest fear is, a lot of times it's that people will criticize their ideas. They will take their feedback the wrong way. They may not recognize the tone or the intention in which it's being given. And so that, they have very valid reasons for being concerned about going out on the limb, taking that courageous step forward to share their ideas publicly. And Seth Godin, in a recent blog, pointed out one of the challenges about that, where somebody disagrees with you and you may take it as a negative attack. And the key is to step back and realize that they feel just as deeply about their opinion. Hopefully, they've considered all the alternatives like you have, and that it's a matter of stepping back and listening to their perspective as opposed to immediately feeling defensive. And that's where emotional intelligence comes in as a tremendous tool for having those constructive, positive feedback sessions. Now, there's a lot of science and a lot of depth around emotional intelligence. However, there are three basic elements to emotional intelligence that are very simple to remember and to practice. The first one is listen. Listen to what's going on around you, listen to other people and their ideas, and then reflect. Reflect on what you've heard, compare it to what your expectations and perceptions are, and then communicate those, and share your ideas based on everything that you've observed and learned. So if we look at the 4 steps towards creating constructive collaborative feedback, the first step is to focus. Focus on what you want to accomplish and recognize where people are in the room so that you can help to focus that conversation in a key direction. And part of that, focusing people in your group or even one-on-one, is to get them to engage, to cooperate with the feedback session. So that's being able to recognize their perception. Hopefully they'll be considering your perception. And as you move into the collaborative stage, you're able to frame the conversation to maintain the focus, or even reframe it to bring people back together. And then with any luck and a lot of hard work, you'll be able to then find a path forward and take some action in a positive direction. Now, there's a lot of steps for feedback sessions. The key, though, is preparing for a remote feedback session. I know we should be preparing for all kinds, but many people who are leading in-person sessions sometimes come in and do it on the fly. And it's very difficult in a remote session because you need to be concise. You need to let everybody know what direction you're going in and really be focused. And that's what this first step is what is your purpose? What is the conversation that you want to have? Because people can go in all sorts of directions, and you need to focus on what is the output and make sure that throughout this feedback session, throughout your collaborative conversations, that everybody stays focused on that point. And that's what this little honeybee is doing. They have one purpose, that's to make honey, and that's where they put their efforts. The second is, once you've chosen what conversation you want to have, you need to start setting your priorities. There's lots of different actions that you can take. And what you need to think about is what is important to you. So just like in all of these stones by the lake, you need to pick out those 4 or 5 topics that you want to focus on and bring those to the table of the conversation in your feedback session. And lastly, and this is where a lot of emotional intelligence focuses, is on empathy. Just like we were saying in the previous slide, people are really afraid of feedback. They're fearful because they don't want people to make fun of them. They're not sure if their ideas are truly well thought out, if people might steal them and take them as theirs. And so as you move into this feedback session, it's important to think about what are the fears and threats that people may feel like they need to protect. And it's very much like this plant. You've got these lovely ideas up on top, but what are people feeling or hiding behind their conversation? And so that's for really constructive collaborative sessions. It's bringing the potential out in everybody, creating those safe spaces so people aren't as fearful and are willing to participate. So as you move into, you've engaged them, you've made them feel safe, you start to facilitate the session. And then next, they're really a partner. One is engaging cooperation, and the other is facilitating collaboration. And they're really go hand in hand. They're not necessarily first step 1 and step 2. So within engaging the cooperation, I'd chosen this field of wheat. I looked back to Brené Brown, where one of her great metaphors when she talks about vulnerability is the difference between functional and dysfunctional teams. So bad things are just going to happen. It's no one's fault. And dysfunctional teams come apart. They have to point fingers, they have to blame somebody before they can move forward towards a solution. Whereas functional teams are the wheat sheaves that come together and start working towards that solution. They don't waste time pointing fingers or blaming. They put all their energies together. And that's where we start to engage cooperation. And when we're working with in-person facilitation sessions, it's so key to have eye contact. The challenge with remote sessions is the camera, your webcam, is your mirror to the rest of the world. So even though on many platforms you see, the Brady Bunch view where everybody is scattered on the screen, and you want to look at them and see their facial expression, and I'm still working on it, you've got to keep your eye contact is in that camera. And along with that, body language can be more difficult because we see people from the waist up. And so if you need to show something with your hands, you need to focus on bringing them higher. You need to pay attention to people's faces. And often with body language, now you need to depend on their voices. And it's also, some people may like to hide behind the video. And it's really important to, as part of making it a safe space, is to recognize that you don't care if they're having a bad hair day. You just want to see their smiling face. That can be something that you've got to overcome. And as we mentioned before, you need to evaluate where people are. In our current situation, I think people are starting to relax, or there's new stressors. Initially, there were just a lot of stress as people were getting used to what I like to call now is the next normal, not necessarily the new normal. And it's important to have check-ins. Very simple, how are you? I was in one check-in session where the facilitator asked everybody to identify a thorn and a rose of what had happened to them in the last week. I've been in other sessions where they start out and say, tell me something great that happened to you yesterday. It kind of gets people onto a positive tone. I've been in other sessions where they go around the room and you mention who was your favorite rock group, or what book or movie did you watch this past weekend. And it's a way of bringing people together, getting them relaxed, feeling safe. And then you move into the last phase of engagement that's promoting all those voices. Set expectations. If there will be a given amount of time for each person to speak and share their viewpoints, establishing ground rules and protocols, or how are you going to raise your hand in person? Are you the platform you're using, if there's a hand raise function, or perhaps you'll put something in chat. It's important to think some of those through, and it will depend on your group of people, the topic, how much time you have. And those are all important things to think about. And as you move into that collaborative session, this is a field of Lego. And I chose this field of Lego because that represents innovation, the myriad of possibilities and new ideas that you can make happen as you look towards new ideas, bring new perspectives, expanded perspectives in. And what's really key about the Lego is all those interconnecting, the little dots, as they call them, that allow different pieces to be connected together. And that's what, when you're working on collaboration within a virtual session, it could be one of the greatest challenges, to keep people's ideas continually coming out, sharing, and getting people to listen to each other and shape and reflect those other ideas as they present their own. And that comes back to actively listening. And that comes back to verifying the accuracy of your understanding. When you're in a one-on-one, and it's a little bit easier to have that back and forth regulated. verify your understanding. There's a myriad of tools available within a remote environment that lets you have a Kanban board, other kinds of, big butcher block with sticky notes, whatever people have used in person. How do you take that same concept, that same capability remotely? And there's several interesting programs out there. Just to name a few, there's Miro, there's Mural. I just saw a new one today called Concept Board, which looks really interesting. So there's a lot of different tools. There's whiteboards, all kinds of tools that you can engage people in a collaborative thought solution finding process. And then what's very important as you start to determine that way forward is engaging those different perspectives by the tools. And you might want to try, if your platform has brainstorming sessions, to break people out. And again, you have a protocol, you have an assignment, and when you come back together, instead of 20 ideas, you might get it down to 4 ideas that can then be discussed as part of the report out and conversation, and you might pursue all 4 or 2 or just 1. The key is that everybody is together and helping to determine what those next actions are. You don't have one person commandeering the entire conversation. And so as you start to lead forward, especially in remote meetings, it's really easy for people not to raise their hands. It's very easy for everybody to depend on the facilitator to take the responsibility for moving forward, for maybe speaking to people offline, and the bulk or the responsibility seems to fall on them more than when they're in person, and people might be more readily to step forward and raise their hand. So the tough part about being that facilitator is to get people to volunteer and share. And most importantly is to confirm accountability. Gain that, yes, you heard me, yes, you will get that back to me on Tuesday. And that's the next step, is setting realistic goals. Especially in our virtual workplace, it often takes more time to make things happen. You can't just go stand at somebody's desk. You have to communicate with email or phone calls, or try to set up another meeting, another conference with several folks. So it can just take more time, and it's important to set realistic goals. And then as you start to set those goals, who do you need to help you get there? That's shaping your path. And I think the last 2 are some of the most important 2 out of these 5, is to expect change. Remember, this is the next normal. It's not the new. Things are going to happen. They're happening faster, and they're not going to be expected. And then as these changes happen, you need to be able to adapt as needed. Adapt the project, adapt your style, your work methods, and charge forward. So as you start to launch your emotional intelligence and really leverage it by listening, reflecting, and communicating thoughtfully, you're able to help your group, whether it's one-on-one or one-on-several, and even one-to-many, to go ahead and focus on the problem at hand. Keep people targeted on what's important, not let them get off tangent with what's not. Help them engage in cooperation so they're expanding their perception, recognizing and analyzing others' perceptions. And then as you start to work together on the solution part, frame it or reframe it as necessary. And then as you move towards that action, make sure that people are on the same page, that they're accountable, and that you've left some place for change and set up procedures how to adapt and manage that change situation. So far we're pretty much keeping on time. And before we open the floor for questions, I just wanted to take a moment and find out, and you might want to put it in chat, if there was something out of this session that you found is of particular importance, that you think is something you would share with somebody, what's essential to having a strong feedback session, and perhaps making a note to yourself that you might try or apply over the next few weeks to practice and to perhaps make one of your remote feedback sessions more successful. So I thank you for your time and attention, and Allison is going to help us with any questions. If you'd like to ask them over voice or put them in chat, I'm going to turn this over to Allison.
Sure. Hi, thank you. So we have a couple. One is to make sure to reflect before acting.
Good point.
And one is, I really value how you tied it all together.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you very much. And I just want to reinforce the point about thinking, reflecting before you act. That's one of the key components of the emotional intelligence model that I depend on. And one of the key points is impulse control. And emotional intelligence is all about balance. There's not one perfect way to approach life, and all of us approach it and engage differently. And that's why it's important to take that temperature, to look at the climate of your group and to be aware of that. And so part of reflecting is reality control, and that's what balances impulse. So even though you may want to jump out of your chair and throttle somebody or interrupt them, if you can work hard to listen and reflect, and then you can communicate, and you will have initiated the reality testing of that portion with your impulse, which could be really creative and innovative. But by thinking before you speak, you're going to keep everybody engaged and not necessarily shoot them down and discourage their participation. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
We have one comment. I find I am better at it when I get myself into the reflective frame of mind.
Oh, excellent. You know what? Me too. So I'm curious, how do you get yourself into that reflective frame of mind? I can use all the assistance I can get because I have, my impulse control is not so strong.
Yeah, 2 counters. It's hard to make it instinctual and stop multitasking.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the other one.
It's hard to make it instinctual and stop multitasking.
Good advice, because when you're multitasking, you're not paying attention. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for chiming along and taking some time to do with your aha moments and your realizations. Definitely personal notes are wonderful. Just wanted to do a quick thank you today for joining today's Skill Builder webinar, Harnessing Emotional Intelligence for Effective Feedback, even virtually. It's time now for Q&A. So Susan, let's give the audience a minute or two to submit any of their questions. In the meantime, remember to subscribe, follow, and connect with us to hear about future events, programs, and promotions from Essential Assets Group. So we are a training and consulting provider specializing in custom knowledge-based training programs, industry-recognized certification-based training programs, and niche consulting services spanning 3 critical areas: it's program and business management, IT governance and service management, and information assurance and cybersecurity. Okay, again, thanks for joining us today. Now over to Susan for Q&A.
Let's see.